The following content is not intended as a substitute for professional legal advice, medical advice, diagnosis, or treatment. Always seek the advice of your attorney, advocate, physician, or other qualified health provider with any questions you may have regarding any medical or educational concerns.
Hello and welcome to Empower Dyslexia. I'm Stephen Yearout, and this show is about helping our parents become a more informed partner in education. On this show, we discuss dyslexia and other related disorders, research, interventions, special education policy at the local, state, and federal level. We also interview experts in their fields. And most importantly, we talk to people with personal stories. We think that it's so important to interview people with personal stories because it helps others understand that you're not in this alone. Please like us on Facebook and subscribe to us on the YouTube channel and write us a review. We want to know your thoughts, and if there's any questions you have that you may need help with, we're here for you. As always, you can find us on all of your favorite apps, Spotify, Stitcher, Google Play, iTunes, Alexa, Podcast, Stitcher, and if you're watching iHeartRadio too, that one's fairly new. If you're watching this live, you're watching it either on Facebook Live or YouTube Live. Again, make sure that you follow and subscribe on YouTube. Hit the notification bell so you know when we drop another episode. Our sponsor, Learning Ally, has graciously given us a discount code for all of our listeners. You can take 20% off a new family membership order when you use the code ED20 at checkout. So go to Learning Ally at www.learningally.org, and you can use that discount code when checking out. So today we have a returning guest, good friend of our show, Dr. Tim Conway. Dr. Conway and I have been talking about the next steps of remediation. When you've got the foundation, the decoding down, we start talking about comprehension, attention, executive function, and the what, why, and how of all of these. I know that this can be a struggle a lot of times to try to understand how all of these pieces, these moving pieces, fit together. So, I want to welcome Dr. Conway back to our show. We're honored to have him again. Welcome, Dr. Conway.
Thanks, Stephen. Pleasure to be here.
I think it may be me. Go ahead.
Can you hear me all right?
It's my headphones.
I'll go over there and help you out there, Stephen. Give me just a second, okay?
Appreciate it, Ziggy.
So why don't you tell a little bit more about, Dr. Conway, why don't you tell us a little bit more about kind of your background and give the viewers a recap? We know that you've been on a couple of times, but for the people who haven't had the chance to see you, could you just tell us a little bit about your work?
Sure, no problem. So I'm a PhD clinical psychologist, specialty in neuropsychology, which is basically studying the brain and behavior with a lot more emphasis on the developmental models of the brain, and especially about how skills build. How do you build language skills? How do we build motor skills? How does the sensory system develop? How do those skills then support development of attention, executive function? How does memory build and grow over time? And how does all of those together begin to develop academic skills, and ultimately your ability to adjust and adapt all of your strengths to the demands of the environment. So I've spent 15 years doing randomized controlled trials through a private clinic called the Morris Center that was asked to partner with Florida State University and the Torgerson Group. We did a bunch of peer-reviewed studies on stroke rehab, where I did that through the Brain Rehabilitation Research Center of Excellence. We published our first paper from the Morris Center on dyslexia back in 1991, and we've had more than a 20-year career of research going from that first publication in 91, when we modified a commercial program for phonological awareness, and we modified it with the approach of developmental behavioral pediatrics, occupational therapy, clinical psychology, neuropsychology, and speech pathology. I also started as a co-founder of the first free charter school only for dyslexia. And so that school opened in 1999, about 20 years ago. And that is the Einstein School in the city of Gainesville, Florida. And for 20 years, it's been providing free services to children using evidence-based methods from peer-reviewed studies, not made-up programs, not something popular that someone's writing a book about and selling, or that someone just has tried in their classroom. They think it's good, and we're going to randomly throw it out there. It's about things that have been tested scientifically, shown to be effective. That school helps us show how we take research out of the ivory tower of the research environment and put it into practice in a school-based setting. I firmly believe that all of these methodologies that have been tested and proven to be effective should be in the public school setting, should be providing free, early, and effective intervention, prevention, or even simultaneous enrichment and early intervention. Also, I'm a dad who has children who both have had diagnoses of dyslexia, ADHD, sensory processing disorder, dysgraphia. One of the children had oral dyspraxia and also the dyscalculia. So I have personal experience with it as well. And genetically, dyslexia doesn't run in my family, it gallops. So my father was not a great speller, probably was dyslexic. My sister didn't finish high school. One of my older brothers was definitely dyslexic. And he got intervention at age 6, and I got intervention/prevention at age 4. And since the age of 19, I've been working with professionals, experts. I've trained thousands of teachers. I've directly worked with personally teaching to read thousands of children through private medical clinics called the Morris Center, through the online ed tech company that we built about 7 years ago called the Neurodevelopment of Words, or nowcompany.net, and also through work with nonprofit public entities, as well as school settings, as well as prison education settings, as well as maximum security state mental hospital educational settings, a lot of different environments. So my expertise really is about the brain as it really revolves around language, learning, and helping to empower children, teens, and adults with as many strengths as possible. Definitely don't want people to continue to believe the new myth that's being perpetuated that the brain is hardwired. It's absolutely not hardwired. At any age, your brain can build new skills and build new strengths. So today's show is talking about attention, memory, and executive function.
Absolutely. So you were talking about your brothers. One of your brothers was actually in the news.
Yeah,
Recently.
he was. This is true. My brother Charlie is a chief scientific officer of a biotech pharmaceutical group called Biohaven Biotech. Charlie's worked for more than 20 years on some research related to pain and models of pain and drug discovery. And he's had the esteemed privilege of bringing a research program to market as a new FDA-approved medication that just came out last week called Nurtec ODT.
That's for migraines, right?
Psyched. Yeah. Sorry?
That's for migraines?
Exactly. It's a dissolving tablet. It impacts within 1 hour, has a high success rate of helping people have a breakthrough response when they're in the middle of experiencing a migraine. It's not a prevention, it's just a breakthrough treatment. And it adds a new one to the market. It's the only one of its kind in the way that actually how it operates in terms of the physiology and how it impacts the body and brain.
Can you tell the Conways to slow down a little bit?
Well, we all got a lot of early intervention on language, memory, attention. And that kind of gives you a lot of strengths to do as much as you can do. And I come from a family who loves to empower others and to be helpful.
Absolutely. So let's talk about attention. We know that ADHD, attentive, not attentive, runs, thick with those of us who have dyslexia. So can we talk a little bit about how that affects both the dyslexia and processing speed and some of the foundations around what you need to have to build good attention?
Yeah, I mean, there's a real thorough, well-tested and popular model of attention is by a cognitive psychologist named Michael Posner. And he has a three-model system of attention. You've got an alerting attentional system, you have an orienting attention system, and then you have an executive control attentional system. Those all feed into how the brain operates and how it works. Excuse me. And then what's viewed as part of the contributing factor to ADHD inattentiveness is those individuals alert well, they orient well, but the executive control doesn't kick in efficiently enough to stop alerting when it should stay focused on something else.
So let's pause there. So real world scenario, what does that sound like in the classroom?
It means in some ways we can actually measure your visual attention separately from your auditory attention. And you may have a student who has strong visual attention, but really poor auditory attention. So if they hear something in the classroom, they have to orient to see what was that? I just heard it. And they have trouble inhibiting their ability to orient to this new input. And ADHD in some ways is really a poorly named disorder. It's not an attention problem. They have plenty of attention. It's more of a focus issue. They struggle to stay focused on where they need to be staying focused, not what's pulling their attention. In contrast, somebody might be weak with visual attention. And so you really don't want those children or those college students or those adults sitting at the back of a room where there's a discussion going on, because they're more likely to get distracted by the people they see in front of them.
Right.
They're more likely to self-select or need the teacher to say, you need to sit up here in the front because you're going to learn more, stay more focused. And think of attention as the precursor or the gatekeeper to learning. If you're not focused and you're not attending to that input, the input's not going to get in, and then learning really can't take place very well when that input is not consistently and efficiently coming in.
Okay, so I know that there's going to be a bunch of parents out there saying, well, my kid has ADHD, non-attentive, like mine,
Right.
but yet he can sit and play Xbox for hours upon hours and hyper focus on something like that. What's that about?
Well, part of it is the reward system built into games. The gaming industry is almost like the gambling industry. How do we get you to get hooked on this and keep playing, keep playing, keep playing? They know how to structure the reward schedules to help build reinforcers, which in some ways are going to release some neurotransmitters that are going to boost that focus skill. And so there's the affective mood part of it. There's the neurotransmitter part of it. And there's just the overall engagement fun part of it. It's much easier to pay attention to something that you have high motivation towards, you're highly engaged in, and you really like doing it. And it causes some release of some neurotransmitters too while you're playing it. It's not that they can't stay focused in class. It's just like it takes a lot more work. It's not as engaging. It's not as interesting. And you're going to struggle to not get distracted by something you see or something you hear, depending on where your strength or weakness is. But again, the diagnosis of inattentive ADHD really requires it to occur in multiple settings, not just in Mrs. Jones's English class.
Right.
It's got to be in multiple classes. You got to see it at home as well. It has to have been happening for years. It can't just show up at age 15 or at age 19 when you're in college. ADHD doesn't just show up then. It should have been a lifelong course of evidence to really meet the diagnostic criteria.
Okay. So let's talk. There's a really good slide that you use all the time and you've actually talked about it on our show multiple times. It's the upside down triangle. Can you kind of walk us through what this is and how this model actually describes how we learn, and if you don't have, the building blocks put in place, how that really causes a lot of issues in your learning?
Absolutely. So this model, like models of language development, like models of reading skills and other skills, really is the developmental model. It talks about what are the foundational skills, how do we get those foundational skills strong, because then everything above it builds on top of that foundation. Many times we'll explain to parents, it's like the foundation of a house. If the foundation's not level, if it's got a crack in it, if there's any other problem with the foundation, upper levels of the house are going to be affected by the deficits in that foundation. So what you see in that graphic is there's 8 sensory inputs at the very bottom at that apex of the upside down triangle. Everyone knows the senses that you learn in school. It's hearing, seeing, touch, taste, smell. But there's 3 other ones that mostly occupational therapists get more explicit training in, and those are interoception, proprioception, and vestibular. Okay. Vestibular is more about your inner ear canals, the balance system. Proprioception, like your body awareness in space. It's why you can close your eyes and touch your nose. You can feel the pull on your joints where they are, even though you can't see your arm. You can feel the sensation of the muscles and joints working together, give you an idea of where your body is in space if you have strong proprioception. An easy way to see weak proprioception is you see individuals who are more, quote, clumsy. They knock things over on the table at dinner every time. They always spill stuff. They bump into furniture that they know where the furniture is. They're seen as being more clumsy, but it's not a clumsiness per se. It's just a decreased body awareness of your body in space compared to the other objects. And then right next to vestibular and proprioception is interoception. And that's your awareness of your internal state of the body. What's your energy level? What's your mood, hunger, toileting? All these other internal receptors all need to work together. And you see the blocks just above it are attention, filtering, and modulation. So this graphic was designed by a PhD OT named Lucy Jane Miller from the Star Center out in Colorado. And Lucy uses this graphic to show folks that these are the core foundational systems that, as long as that sensory input, that sensory communication between these inputs are communicating together well, they're sharing information together well, they're working together well, then you're more likely to have better attention, visual, auditory. Then you're more likely to have better ability to modulate your attention. Do I need to up my attention? Do I need to, lax it a little bit? And also just that regulation as well. So it's much more a sensory-based developmental model of some aspects of attention. It's not the only model. It's not proven to be 100% correct, but it gives us a way to heuristically conceptualize how these systems work together and why recess, playtime, sports activities, arts, music, all of those were so important as part of the foundations to that sensory motor system development and building those attention and focus skills.
Right. I mean, we talk to schools and teachers all the time about finding some other way of deterring or guiding the behavior differently than taking away recess or PE time. Yeah. I mean, that's so important for our kids. So can you talk a little bit about the difference in attention for auditory or versus visual? I mean, we kind of talked a little bit about that with the student that sits, if the student is or an adult, right, has more visual attention issues. You don't want them sitting at the back of the room. Can you talk a little bit more about that?
Yeah, I mean, it's important to understand where your strengths and weaknesses are in your attentional system, and whether your visual system is better able to stay focused and inhibit distraction than your auditory system is. And then there's tactile as well. You have many parents experience their children want them to cut the tags out of their shirts, right, because they feel the tag touching their skin the whole time. And it irritates them, it distracts them. It's almost like a Chinese waterboarding torture experience where they just can't stop being annoyed and bothered by it, which raises your anxiety level, raises your discomfort level, can raise your frustration level. And so many times parents acquiesce. The kid's less aggravated if we cut the tags out, we'll cut the tags out.
Right.
So that's just explaining how some of these sensory systems, when they're not operating efficiently, can be more of a distractor, more of a problematic system. And it used to be believed that, what you got was what you got. You're wired that way. That's just, quote, how you are. Or some people even incorrectly equate it with your personality. It's not your personality. It's not how you always are going to be. It's how you are at this moment in time. But we know the brain has what we call experience-dependent neuroplasticity. That means with the proper experiences, some of that brain wiring, that neural wiring, should be able to be changed with more efficient wiring or more dense wiring. There's lots of different ways it changes that actually could then decrease your tactile sensitivities. And then maybe you're less distracted by clothing, less bothered by sticky stuff on your fingers, less bothered by the seams of your sock. And you also may be able to begin to build more efficient and easier visual perceptual skills, or more efficient and easier, phonological processing. If you're not having to work so hard to really use those systems, and even with academics, if your reading skills are less effortful, then technically it's probably going to drain your attentional system less because it doesn't take as much energy and effort to do it.
Right.
And I think a good analogy for parents is think about, Steve, when you learned how to drive a car, you're probably on the farm with a 3 on the column old pickup truck that your dad didn't want you to kill any people or something. And as you first get in it and you're learning how to drive it, then it's taking all of your attention, all of your focus. But as you practice it and as that wiring changes, that wiring builds, then driving becomes more automatic, takes less effort, takes less attention, and it's more of an automatized or an efficient process that you can do with less cognitive effort and less attention and focus.
So we have a child with ADHD. How do we manage it?
Well, we advocate a holistic approach. And by we, I mean, the medical clinics called the Morris Center, we're using a medical team of consulting psychiatry, psychologists, speech pathologists, OTs, all working together with parents. And so we understand there's a multitude of systems that work together. And we say, look, there's basically 10 elements you could really be attending to that might help have some positive impacts on attention. And one that I just heard about from a lecture that Dr. Posner was giving, they're running some studies on meditation and showing that how meditation actually leads to new neuroplasticity, new white matter fibers. And they think it actually can have some positive benefits on that cingulate cortex, which is probably your high level attentional system. And so we're now advocating the use of mindfulness when it's done properly by a psychologist or someone properly trained, can actually help induce a little bit more attentional control. So that's kind of an example of a behavioral approach. We use behavioral things to help train skills. Some people behaviorally do stuff on their own to help maximize or boost their attention. If you're in a business meeting with a bunch of adults, you have men and women around the table, some people are jiggling their leg. It's bouncing up and down, bouncing up and down. Other people are clicking a pen, and people next to them are like, would you stop that? But they're doing it because it's alerting, it's arousing, it's kind of helping them stay focused. Others are in a swivel chair, and they're kind of moving in a chair the whole time everyone's talking because changing your body position in space can alert that attentional system. It might release some acetylcholine, which might boost that attentional system. So there's behavioral things that we can teach from an OT perspective, from a psychologist perspective, that help do some things that might help maximize better attention, better focus. These are not a cure or treatment for ADHD. They're one component of a system of things you can do. Others are very basic. All the neurotransmitters in the brain that fuel attention focus, Stephen, where do they start? They start in the stomach. It's that gut-brain connection. We know now today that gut-brain connection is really critical. So we want to be sure that each child is getting a whole diet, healthy diet, all the food groups with proper nutrition, because then the body's more likely to have the micronutrients that it needs to build the neurotransmitters, to keep those transmitter levels at the proper level to fuel that attentional system. So there's diet. We also know that if a child has allergies, that can decrease attention and focus. If you don't sleep well, whether it's a child, teenager, or adult, any of us who don't sleep well, you'll have decreased attention. We also know exercise really has a positive impact on the brain, on neuroplasticity, on efficiency of cardiology of the heart, oxygenation. So exercise is really important as well. There's the behavioral piece. There's also the environmental piece. Let's say that you're more distracted by the person in front of you, like we just talked about, then environmentally move yourself to the front of the class so there's fewer distractors. Then we know if we make sensorimotor processing more efficient, so it's easier to look at the board and copy down. Many children with dyslexia have a dysgraphia or a sensory processing disorder that actually affects their ability to copy from board to paper. Many of them have trouble with handwriting, which is a higher level skill. But the intervention for that's not handwriting therapy. It's actually sensory-based OT to build the lower level skills before you get to the higher level skill. And so if we do things in the sensory motor realm with a sensory integration, sensory therapy trained OT, we can see changes on standardized testing for these visual perceptual skills, fine motor skills, visual plus motor skills, and those increased efficiencies can lead to a decrease on the drain or demand of the attentional system. But besides sensory motor, then the next one is, what if we change language skills? If we make your phonological processing stronger, then theoretically speaking, you should have an easier time to process phonology. If we then change your academic skills of better decoding, better phonetic spelling, then that should also decrease the attentional demands or the attentional drain for the difficultiness of the tasks, and that then increases your attentional resources. So from those 9, then we get the last one, which is pharmacotherapy. For some individuals, not all, and with some medications, again, not all, there can be a small dose of medication that can have a high positive effect on improved focus abilities, and that can lead to more efficiencies in learning, less problem behaviors, and the ability to engage and learn more in class. And we just advocate all 10. So if it's sleep, diet, exercise, allergies, behavior, environment, improve language function, improve sensory motor function, improved academic skills, and if still necessary, and maybe even necessary in the beginning, is pharmacotherapy. That gives us the broadest way to approach this from a very holistic fashion. And sometimes medication doesn't work. And so you're better off to be using at least those 9 things to have a parent understand how to help work with professionals to help their child have the best learning and efficiency of learning skills possible.
Okay. There, we just put up the graphic on that. I'll make sure that we put that on the website also if anybody wants to see that graphic. Well, let's move on to memory and comprehension. Because I talk to a lot of parents, and they talk about how their child has just finished, a dyslexia therapy program, whatever it is. And I start asking them a little bit more about how their child is doing in school now. And almost without fail, the main thing that I hear is memory and comprehension struggles still. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Why is that?
Gosh, that's a good question.
I know that's how long is a piece of string type question, but we parents want to know why, they just went through, however long of a therapy program.
Right.
And yet they're still having issues with comprehension and, holding on to that.
Right. And let's think of it this way, that you have a language system and you have a memory system as well. There's different types of memory. There's visual memory, there's auditory memory, there's this belief that there might be some motor memory as well. And we know that, say, for example, because many people listening to this podcast have children or themselves have struggled with reading. If reading is a much more difficult process, then you are going to struggle potentially with comprehension too. One, because you're exerting so much energy to do the reading, it's hard to even think about what the story's talking about.
Right.
Another contributing factor might be, as you're doing the reading, if you're misreading words and you don't catch it, you're actually then changing the meaning of the story. You don't even realize it because you read steam when the word actually said stream. It had R in it. And if you accidentally made a phonological error or a visual word error, you kind of guessed that the word didn't sound it out, then you have essentially changed the meaning of the story. We know from the stroke research that damage towards the front of the brain can affect reading and spelling, but it doesn't necessarily affect comprehension. In contrast, damage towards the back part of the brain typically doesn't affect reading and spelling quite as much, but has a bigger impact on comprehension. It can affect your listening comprehension. It can affect your reading comprehension. But all of this area here together on the left hemisphere is our predominant language network that we use for language, learning, reading, spelling, writing. But it's also that essential piece used for comprehension. And so there's different parts of the network that are supposed to be working together. So just because you can read doesn't guarantee you comprehend, because the processes by which you comprehend is a different set of processes than by which the brain actually does the reading. The most prominent theory that I look to and follow is that of another cognitive psychologist named Dr. Alan Paivio. The late Dr. Paivio, for many decades, studied a theory called the dual coding theory. Very simply put, dual coding meant some of what you're learning is linguistic-based information on these left hemisphere. Like if, Stephen, we talk to you about systems administration, that's your background. That's the vocabulary you talk about all the time. That's going to be easy to comprehend what I'm describing because you live and work in that world today. So that's there's that verbal-based language system. But you also have the ability to visualize and make images and picture things in your head too. And you could be picturing things about systems administration, or if I was trying to describe to you a new content, and the new content may be something you have very little experience in, like say, if I want to explain to you how we do fMRI brain imaging. My dissertation was an fMRI brain imaging study of adults with and without dyslexia. We were using fMRI to see, can we, in the cortical regions of the brain, find a difference in the network's activation for adults with phonological processing disorders and dyslexia versus adults who don't have phonological processing deficits and don't have dyslexia. And so if I wanted to explain to you how that imaging technology works, how it actually knocks molecules out of spin, and we look to see how they recover back up. And basically what we're looking for is where in the brain is blood taking oxygen? Because wherever the blood is taking oxygen, that's the parts of the brain doing the work. And so if I could describe picturesque to you how we find the blood that's got the oxygen, that's the parts that are working, then we color those oranges or reds or different color combinations. That's how we're then using imaging to figure out what part of the brain's doing the work. So dual coding says, and that graphic we had up just says there's a verbal system and there's a visual system. You want both to be equally strong. We don't want to say, oh, he's a verbal learner, let's teach everything to him verbally. That's a horrible idea, because you're actually going to make him more impaired visually because you're doing nothing to help them build their visual skills. And they're better off, each of us, children, teens, young adults, old adults, are better off if we have two systems equally strong, both visual and verbal, and both are working together. Then your brain will interchangeably use these systems to maximize memory and learning.
So I think we actually have another slide that shows, there we go. So this, and when we were talking about this earlier, there's a lot of people that put up, picture walls or whatever when teaching reading. That's not what you're talking about here, correct?
No, and those are the new popular fad are called sound walls. And they're putting up pictures of the sounds of a word. They're putting up pictures of the mouth that go along with the sound of a word. They're putting up keywords that have those letter spellings in them. That's actually just a memorization approach to trying to memorize phonics. Unfortunately, people don't understand that's not going to give you much better outcome than what you've done before, which is just doing auditory only training. Anybody who says you can do phonics training just with your eyes closed has no idea how phonics really and phonological awareness really builds. You can't do phonological awareness with your eyes closed. Phonological awareness is actually a multi-sensory modality of visual, auditory, tactile, kinesthetic. Those sensory systems are what build that phonological system. In the context of those sound walls, if you're just using pictures, you're leading them to use a visual memorization approach, try to memorize what sound goes with what letter. That might achieve your goal of getting the answer, but it's less likely to build the processing system of phonological awareness. That's like saying, if you do a bunch of activities of phonological awareness training and they're all auditory activities, we've known for decades that you can get better on those activities, but typically those don't relate to better improvement in reading and spelling because those activities are done only auditorily, and the brain actually is using much more than just the auditory system when it's building phonological awareness and then generalizing those phonological skills to the acts of reading and spelling. So from that graphic, it's imagery to help you understand concepts, and also linguistics to actually be able to explain those concepts. So you want the imagery system and the language system to be tied together. Best way to think about it is if we tell a story and we say, yeah, the airplane was flying along and it lost gas and started diving. Just using gesture makes it more likely you're going to visualize in your head what I'm describing, because gesture kind of helps you get a picture in your mind. There's that old cliche, a picture's worth 1,000 words. It's really more like 1,000,000. Because imagery has been shown to be markedly more successful in helping with immediate comprehension, retention, retrieval, and reasoning and problem solving. And kids used to get imagery practice every day. Basically, many households, the parents sat around the dinner table and they told stories at dinner time. And they talked about it, and they used gesture and intonation, and the car crashed through the fence, and all of that stuff made people engaged, and they're kind of visualizing it. My favorite example is, for those who know about the radio show, when they did a dramatic production of H.G. Wells's War of the Worlds, people who tuned in late and didn't get their previous announcement that this is just a dramatization, it's a production, they thought it was the evening news. They thought they were being told Martians were landing, and they're grabbing the kids and heading to the bomb shelter. Because let me tell you, their brains are visualizing some pretty scary scenes that, we had just been invaded by Martians. So it's using imagery to really maximize comprehension, maximize memory.
Well, we see that a lot now with, especially the standardized tests, where they're having to write a story or a paragraph or whatever about whatever it is that they read, and we're seeing these children have struggle to be able to build that movie in their mind. Right. In order to actually make that or write that paper.
Yeah. And a good way to recognize that is if they can't actually verbally describe it to you, can it verbally tell you what's going on, then they're in no position to switch to writing. Because written composition cognitively is a much higher level task than just verbal communication. So if your verbal communication skills of expressive language, describing stuff are weak down here, there's no point doing a lot of work on written language. It's kind of like saying, if you're adding, subtracting, dividing, and multiplication is not strong enough yet, there's no point doing algebra because you're missing some of the foundational skills that you need for that algebra skill. So we want to work on imagery first in the spoken language abilities. Can you describe a story? Can you give me color, size, shape, all the details? And can you make sure that the words you give me build a very clear movie in my mind so that my movie and your movie are both likely to be the same? Then we have more accurate, more clear communication. If you can't do it verbally, then we don't have the student ready to really switch over to the written system as well. When we do improve that verbal communication, that verbal imagery skill, that receptive imagery where you're listening to make a movie from someone talking to you, or that expressive imagery where you've got a movie in your mind and you have to put it to words with such detail that the listener gets the same movie you have. Ironically, herein lies a lot of the challenges between husband and wife or partners in marriage. If one of them has an image and their words don't effectively communicate it to the other partner, they're not going to have clear communication.
Right.
And that results in many frustrating moments. And I'm sure that never happens with you and Amy, but other couples experience that.
Not at all. Not at all. I think she would probably disagree with that statement.
Yeah, she's not here to defend herself.
Right. So we have language processing. That goes to phonological, and then it goes to auditory memory.
Mm-hmm.
So we got to make sure that we build up all of those systems in order to make sure that we can hold on to this information long enough to either do the tasks that we need to do or whatever we're being tasked to do, we need to make sure that we are able to do it. So.
Right.
Well, let's jump to executive function.
That's an interesting topic today.
Yeah, this is something. I mean, for my middle son, or my youngest son, actually. So we figured out that my middle son was ADHD, non-attentive, and our youngest son, not dyslexic, doesn't have any other dysgraphic or anything else, not ADHD, but he, from a toddler, would throw fits, and he was the kid that would throw himself down in the middle of the store and scream and make a scene. And we never understood why. And he's also the child that, he's very eye for an eye. He doesn't think outside of the action.
Yeah, that literal piece of what he sees.
Right. So you hit me, I'm going to hit you back. It doesn't matter what the consequence is on the other side of that.
Right.
And it wasn't until I sat through an executive function kind of a lunch and learn, and I was like, oh, this is it. This is the answer. However, later on after you and I spoke, we figured out that, or you explained to me what executive function actually was and why it wasn't that. So let's start with, just give us a brief understanding of what executive function is and what it's not.
Well, essentially, executive function is a higher level system that uses information from language, from memory, from sensorimotor to either reason, problem solve, plan, organize, understand cause and effect. It's a higher level cognition system. It's a control system. What many people overlook sometimes is if you have poor comprehension, there's not as much for the executive function system to execute, do, or plan with. If you have phonological difficulties and it impacts your auditory memory, and maybe you are really poor at 2 or 3 step directions because you really can't hold on to the directions, you forget them before you can carry them out. Well, that's not an executive function problem. That's actually more of a language processing or auditory memory that's inhibiting your ability to get to executive function. Because if you forget the information, then you really can't do the executive piece of it. So some people talk about executive function as being a separate system of the brain all by itself alone. We think of that being more up here in the left and right sides. It's called dorsal, lateral, prefrontal cortex. Plays a lot to do with working memory and executive function, as well as the frontal lobes are involved in executive function as well. But again, those systems are the control systems. It's kind of like saying, here's the conductor of the orchestra and everything else back here is the orchestra. Well, if some of the members of the orchestra are not performing properly, you can't do as much executive function without that information that's missing or that processing that's not coming through. So we really look at executive function can be impacted by weaker attention or impulsivity. Executive function can be impacted by memory issues or poor working memory. Executive function certainly can be impacted by your language processing skills, your language comprehension skills, or your facility or adeptness with using language to engage in metalinguistic reasoning and problem solving. So there's multiple pieces that feed into that executive function. And in some of our studies, like one of the ones with the 8 to 10-year-olds, we did no work on executive function, but we did measure their math skills before and after. All we did was change their phonological processing. We raised their decoding skills from the 5th percentile to the 45th percentile. We closed the gap in their phonological processing skills. We saw their reading comprehension close the gap as well after just a few months of instruction. And then we actually saw changes in math skills too. And part of it we thought was because we'd improved reading, so it's easier to do some of the math problems, but also now they're able to hold on and think and problem solve and reason with language better to understand some of the operational pieces and hold on to the operational pieces of executing math problems. So there's a multiple of levels of systems that feed into that executive function piece. Others can conceptualize it as a separate system all by itself. I see it more as it's the higher level system and these lower level systems are feeding into it, which will empower it to do more.
Okay. And the example that when we were talking about this, the example that I kind of saw was in the computer industry, we have the difference between RAM memory and we have hard drive or storage memory.
Right.
RAM is volatile, and once you turn your computer off, it's gone. I look at that as kind of working memory. And then long-term memory is like your computer hard drive, your storage. Is that a good representation for those of us that are computer geeks and can understand, and we're using that visualization to be able to understand all of it?
Yeah, I think it's not a perfect fit, but it certainly captures a part of what this is involved in, because different than the computer, you may have something in working memory, and it may be reaching towards something type of executive intent, action, and just because you sleep at night and wake back up, it hasn't been wiped clean. You might still be able to retrieve and continue executing on problem solving, thinking about this problem, it's still there, and continue to use the information you had thought through before to extend that thought, that thinking process, that problem solving, that
Correct.
task analysis, whatever you're doing at a higher executive level. But essentially, because working memory has the term working in it, it means you're doing some type of manipulation with the information. And that in and of itself involves and engages part of the executive function on what you're doing with it, how you're analyzing it, how you're using it, how you're problem solving with that information. So yeah, there's like a RAM system for immediate short-term storage manipulation.
Right.
But you want stuff then later on content-wise. There's content stuff for ideas or memories that get stored in that more longer-term system. Many people don't understand there's a lot we do not know about memory. There's still a lot we do not know about the attentional system. There's actually a real lot that we still have not discovered about how the brain actually does spelling. It's why many of the phonics programs are perplexed when we do phonics and you just drill, multisensory memorization phonics, and it doesn't change spelling. Well, it's a different set of systems, and there's a different set of processing. Some of it we understand, some of it we're still trying to figure out.
So my ADHD is kind of acting up here. Every time that you come on, you've got some type of painting or picture behind you. That's a very interesting picture. What is that?
This is George Miller III. He's an artist who only does artwork about literacy. This one's actually called Each One Teach One. And the caption says, bringing down the walls of illiteracy. So George does a great job really just helping talk about how important it is to empower kids with literacy, all cultures with literacy, all ages of literacy. And so here at the Morris Center, you're going to see a lot of these paintings hanging around or prints hanging around, because we're really about empowering kids as much as possible for literacy, for memory, for executive function, for sensorimotor skills, all of that together.
That's awesome. Thanks. I'm
Yep.
sorry. I was just sitting there staring at that picture. Sorry. Anyway, well, I mean, that gives us a good overview of when your child is having, ADHD, attentive or non-attentive, either way, how that can affect, working memory. It can affect your executive function. It can affect your language. I mean, it's like, I can't remember what the name of those bubbles are where they all kind of intersect. I mean, it's a complete system that's all working together. And if one, like you were saying earlier, if one piece of it is not working efficiently, then, I mean, it throws everything out of whack. Exactly.
And many times what people miss is in education, it gets really focused on a strategy and this strategy and this strategy. Well, the brain's not a strategy machine. It's not built and based by strategies. People who are usually teaching strategies have an answer they're trying to help the child get.
Right.
It's a strategy for memorizing this. It's a strategy for learning this content. Developmentally, as a neuropsychologist, we're looking at this from the developmental model. How do these skills build? What builds phonological awareness, and how do you make it stronger? What builds reading skills, and how do you make them stronger? What builds spelling skills, and how do you make them stronger? What builds fine motor skills that then later are necessary for efficiency of handwriting and integrate visual motor skills? So when you look at it developmentally, then we're actually not doing strategy training or strategy programs. So many times people ask me, just tell me how that now foundations for speech, language, reading, and spelling program, how does it work? I'm like, well, that's like asking me to describe to you a heart surgery. There's like 100 different steps, but there's decision trees along the way that we've perfected, we've honed out because we've been doing this kind of work. We've built that program for more than 30 years. And one thing that people have gotten confused about too is in our publications, in our randomized controlled trials, we used a commercial program and modified it over 20 years. None of those early studies actually list the Now Foundations for Speech, Language, Reading, and Spelling program. It's no different than what we started talking about at the beginning, my brother's work in drug discovery. None of his early publications talk about what is now called Nurtec ODT. You do work with a program, you build a program of research, and then when you're ready to take it to market, you brand it and market it and put it out there.
I got you.
So yes, the program's not on those randomized controlled trial studies. It's not listed in that 1991 paper in Annals of Dyslexia. It's not listed in my 10 years of stroke rehab. What's in there is us as a team, as a group, building the systematic system over time, which then we branded in 2013 and brought out. So it's understanding how these pieces kind of go together, but really looking at it from a developmental perspective, not what's a new strategy. We have to help educators get past just looking for a trick. The brain's not a trick machine. It's a developmental system. We want to build the foundational skills solid, because that's the research that we did that showed you could prevent dyslexia for more than 95% of children at age 5 if you use a multi-sensory developmental approach, not strategies, not phonics, not multi-sensory memorization of phonics. Those don't have the same long-term outcomes because they're not building the brain's processors, which then build the functional abilities over time. It's just a different approach coming from developmental science.
Well, Dr. Conway, we always really appreciate how much you share with our listeners, and your willingness to come on and spend an hour with us, trying to get us to that tagline that we have. We want to become a better informed parent so we can be a better partner in education. So I want to thank you for all that you do, the time that you spend with us and others, and hopefully we'll definitely have you back on.
One quick question, Stephen. Can you give us a quick update on your spelling, your reading, as well as your son's?
I believe that I'm really close to the end. It is like somebody has turned the light on for me with spelling and reading. When I'm reading something and I come to a word that I've never seen before, I'm able to sound it out and keep going. It just makes everything less stressful, less laborious, and it's the same thing with Asher. It has been life-changing for both of us. So, I can't say enough about it.
Super. And you experienced firsthand what I'm talking about when I say it's that developmental approach that builds these language processors first, then builds up into the written language system, and then keeps going higher up. And then later on, you guys will give you some experience with that mental imagery training as well, because that mental imagery program that we have too can be very powerful for those who don't have reading problems, but it's like words go in one ear and out the other.
Right.
There's a comprehension deficit. It's not the same system. It takes a different approach. We have lots of data about how that brain system should be working. We have lots of clinical experience. The Morris Center has been open for 34 years. Lots of experience about how to build these systems to a higher degree of strength. So then we empower you as an adult or a teenager like your son or a 6-year-old who can then have stronger language processing, language comprehension, and language skills to complement the academics.
Well, I can't wait. I really can't. Well, I appreciate it, Dr. Conway. We're just about out of time. At the end of our show, we always like to recommend if your child is having struggling in school or is just not catching on, please start the testing process sooner than later. You can go on our website, www.empowerdyslexia.info, and download the templates we have on our website. Download the template, put your information in, hand it over to your counselor at your campus. your children will be happy, and you will be happy to provide, or that your child is getting the appropriate services for them. So I want to thank our sponsors. We'll have that coming up just in a second. But next Thursday we have a really, really good show. So I can't wait to let you know who it is, and I'll put out a post later this afternoon, just as a little teaser. But until then, we'll see you next time.
Learning Ally is a proud sponsor of the Empowered Dyslexia podcast. At Learning Ally, we are always looking for new ways to engage readers struggling with a reading deficit like dyslexia and help them work to their potential. Visit www.learningally.org to learn about the Learning Ally audiobook solution, including which of your students are eligible for access. If you live in Texas, we have great news. The Texas Education Agency provides access to the Learning Ally audiobook solution for all K-12 public and charter school students with reading deficits. Get started today by visiting www.learningally.org/Texas.